It's being called the most comprehensive documentary ever produced on the fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl Death Incorporated provides an in depth exploration of the fentanyl crisis, the most dangerous drug ever created, which has become the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45. Through interviews with international intelligence operatives, law enforcement officials, medical professionals, policymakers, and affected families, this film uncovers the unprecedented potency of fentanyl, which is 100 times more powerful than morphine. It examines the swift escalation in overdose deaths, the fastest in U.S. history, and highlights the global and domestic supply chains contributing to the epidemic. Exactly how severe is the problem? How evil are the distributors of this poison? Watch this.
A few months ago in downtown Seattle, I met 3 drug dealers who were giving away fentanyl pills, the blue pills, for free. I eventually make it up to the dealers and ask them, what are you guys doing? And they go, yo man, we're trying to hook these guys and gals. This is gonna be our new customer base.
Got it. So you want them to die while high?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's what they want. Who are you to take that away?
That is evil personified. That's what that is. Dr. Robert Marbut is a fentanyl expert who has worked on issues of illicit drugs such as fentanyl and homelessness for decades. He's worked across 3 different U.S. presidential administrations. He's the senior producer and the subject matter expert for this documentary, and he joins us to discuss the fatal fentanyl crisis here, strictly speaking, with us right now. Dr. Marbut, thank you for making the time for us here today. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me on. And more importantly, thank you for caring about the fentanyl crisis.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? My blood ran just a little cold. I'm not saying that. I guess I am saying that for effect. I'm trying to say, though, that that's chilling. What that dealer said, do you want to see them die while high? Yup. They don't care. Not only do they say, well, if it happens, it happens. I mean, I would imagine they probably want most of their customers to live so that they can become repeat customers. But with fentanyl, obviously, far too few of them actually end up living. But man, that's just, if that isn't evil, I don't know what is, Doctor.
It is. And they personify evil. And so does many people in the supply chain doing the same thing. And I get asked a lot when we show that clip, that specific clip, and they said, well, why would they want to kill their customers? You got to sort of flip it and realize the more people dying means the more people buying. And everybody knows fentanyl is so deadly. So the more people die, that means the more sales they're getting. It's the strangest business dynamic I've ever seen in a drug.
Yeah, I mean, it is, we hear about fentanyl all the time. And I don't think people generally get it in terms of, the numbers can be kind of overwhelming to the point where you disclose 65,000 people died of fentanyl last year, 75,000 people. Like, that's enough to fill a stadium. And you hear that, and maybe for a second to give you pause, but then you're just like, you can't grab that. You can't realize these are, 75,000 actual lives. These are human beings. These are people with families, mothers, fathers, children, and so on and so forth. And that each one of those deaths that was preventable is a tragedy. So, I mean, let's talk about this in lethality. I read that number I just used, 75,000, was in 2023. The CDC said that dropped by about 17% or so in 2024. And this is all just here in the US, of course. What can you say about the actual numbers, Doctor?
Well, there are a lot of numbers out there because CDC reports fentanyl deaths in several different categories. That's just one category. There are 3 other categories where fentanyl is also dying. People are dying in it. The stat to me that really captures the existential threat of fentanyl is this. More people have died in fentanyl in the United States than all American men and women in all 7 branches of service, plus intelligence agency, for the last 100 years of wars. So if you go World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Iraq, Afghanistan, Kosovo, a few other UN, global war on terror, add all the American deaths in theater and direct combat, add them all together, more people have died in fentanyl in the United States in the last 5 years than all of that combined for 100 years.
5 years.
5 years of
That's
fentanyl
just
deaths.
in 5 years. That's astounding. So let's talk about why. Let's talk about causes. As a matter of fact, what I'd love to get your insight on is how much of this is driven by profit, cartels, smugglers, mules, and so on and so forth. Trying to, like the guy that we saw in the video there, trying to get people hooked for profit, and how much of it is people who didn't intend to get hooked on it, people who were using opioids, prescribed opioids for pain management for one legitimate illness or another, and then they become hooked. And then when the medication runs out and the prescription runs out, they're looking for a way to keep that going because their body became addicted to it, and they start grasping for these things on the street. So what is can you break down percentages or just the likelihood of what is really the most dangerous?
Well, that's probably the most sophisticated question I've ever got asked in all the media is tying two sides together. So let me tie it together.
Okay.
We all are very familiar with the Purdue Pharma crisis that happened about 10 years ago. And the doctor, to way oversimplify it, the doctors were saying these synthetic opioids were non addictive and it's a new fangled way of getting a painkiller and you wouldn't get addicted. Well, it turned out that was just a big fat lie. It turned out it was even more addictive and it was also more deadly. So when all those lawsuits happened with Purdue Pharma, they weren't the only one. There were other manufacturers, suppliers. Suddenly, you had millions of people on prescriptions, and you had roughly 700,000 people that were deeply addicted to synthetic opioids. So you had more, obviously, a lot of prescriptions up here, but then you had almost a million people addicted. They went cold turkey. So where did they go to backfill that addiction? Because nobody helped them get off of it. Nobody said, "Hey, we got millions of subscriptions or prescriptions out there, and we need to deal with it." Nobody did. So the Mexican cartels with China backfilled it. And for the Mexican cartels, it was pure business. They were already distributing meth and heroin in the United States. So they had the network, they had the supply chain, and then China had the chemistry, the chemicals, if you will. They made it, backfilled it. And so, hence, phase one of the fentanyl crisis in America was simply China and the cartels backfilling the problem we had with Purdue Pharma in the most deadliest of effects that you can possibly imagine.
How is it produced? And I ask that only because, like, when you say meth, we all hear about meth labs and meth lab explosions. It's very dangerous. It's very hard to do. But fentanyl, of course, I mean, it's flooding the markets, if you will, meaning our country and our schools and our towns and our communities. It's flooding it with just thousands and millions of pills. So, is it easy to make? It sounds like it is.
It is not only easy to make, you can make it sadly yourself. Yeah, we have a part where we interview one of the Reuters reporters who literally went on the internet, got about $3,600 of supplies, mostly in the open web, a little bit on the dark web, and was able to, with that amount of material, is able to produce about $3 million of street fentanyl. And so fentanyl is very cheap to make. It's now easy to make because there's so much information about it. But what makes fentanyl so dangerous is how lethal it is. There's no drug that's ever been made this powerful in the world's history as synthetic opioids. 1/15th of a grain of rice will kill you or I. 2 or 3 grains of salt equivalent will kill anybody. And so think about a rice grain killing 15 people. That's how powerful it is. And you don't smell it, unlike other drugs. You can't taste it, so you don't know if you're getting it. And it's nearly microscopic in terms of the potency. So all of that taken together in a very wide open supply chain that started in China, went to Mexico. And by the way, in the last 8, 9 months, is really starting to shift up to the northern border and coming in through Canada with the biker gangs up in Canada.
Well, you beat me to one of my questions. I was going to say, in one of the pictures you have on the website, fentanyldeathincorporated.com, you have uh, four flags. You have the American flag, you have the Chinese flag, you have the Mexican flag, and you have the Canadian flag. And I thought, I get three of the four. I didn't know this was a Canada problem. I didn't know this was something that was coming in just as much through the northern border as the southern border, but it is, you're saying.
And that has really changed in the last year. And simply why it changed is we started bringing so many agents from the northern border to help with the southwest border. And even the agents, this is one of the scariest things, and a lot of people just aren't talking about it. We have agents on the northern border, so they're in their sector, they're at their post. But what they're really doing is they're on their equivalent of Zoom processing people from the southwest border. So they're on post, but they're really not out in the wilderness. They're not out working that sector. And so the northern border now is just as porous as the southern border has become. And unfortunately, again, biker gangs, that's why we call it incorporated. This is starts with the money. China started with the money, cartels start with the money, the biker gangs started with money, and if you back it up, Purdue Pharma started with the money.
President Trump said something shortly after he was reelected, and he talked about tariffs. And he immediately said, just so you know, Canada, Mexico, 25% tariffs on all goods coming from your countries into ours if you don't secure the borders from your side. And most people said, Mexico, yup, deserved, because we know what the problem is at the southern border. But Canada? I mean, is the border really that porous the way it is on the south, to the point where tons of people are coming across? And maybe the answer isn't people, but it is, like you said, those biker gangs and whomever it is that is muling those drugs across the border. Is that why you think there is a focus on this? And do you think that a renewed focus on the borders by the new incoming administration may cut down on this problem at least somewhat?
Let me take the back first, and then I'll go to your first.
That
It
works.
more President Trump has done more, elect has done more in the last 60 days on fentanyl than the prior 4 years of the administration. He got Premier Trudeau to come down and have dinner with him, and most of the conversation was about fentanyl. When a lot of people have not been aware of what's going on in the Canadian border, and so the talk of tariffs has gotten everybody's attention. He has the attention of China, he has attention of Mexico. And the fact that the biggest drug bust in Canadians' history appears to have occurred, until they tabulate all the weight and all that, you won't know for sure. But it looks like if it's not the biggest single bust ever, it's one of the biggest, has happened since he's been elected. Two of the biggest busts in Mexico have happened since he's elected. And always remember about Canadian border, between two countries, of any two countries in the world, the longest shared border is United States and Canada. And it's not just, Blaine to Maine, it's also the Alaska border with Canada. And I think a lot of people forget that. So this is the longest shared border of any two countries in the world. So when you start to process that, and you realize how much we've thinned out our northern border to take care of the southwest border, that's part of the explanation of how Canada became an easy, in many places, just walk it across.
I want to go back to China, the other flag, or one of the other four flags that you kind of have in the imaging of the documentary. By the way, where can people watch this documentary?
Right now, you can go get it on a computer streaming based salemnow.com, Salem Now, like the city.com, and you can go pull it down. We're going to be in Warner Brothers has picked it up in distribution. So we're going to be in what's called a limited theatrical release in March. And then we'll go to mainstreaming over, all the traditional platforms we know about in late April, early May.
Do you have a list of locations when it does do its limited theatrical release?
Yes, and you'll be able to go to that fentanyldeathincorporated.com, and you'll be able to see that and where we'll be doing it. And I encourage it, and it's not just because we're involved, we pack so much into this 1 hour. You'll learn about the science, the lethality. You'll understand about supply chains overseas, the internal supply chains in the United States. That in the fourth flag we put in there is United States.
Mhm.
And there's been a tendency across many parts of the United States to legalize high end hard drugs, high volume drugs. And I couldn't disagree more with that. We need to recriminalize, especially high end and high volume drugs. And sometimes it's by statute, like the California legislature actually had reduced they moved it from a felony to a misdemeanor to really nothing. And then in some places, it's prosecutors using their discretion and not prosecuting it. Even though it's on the books, they're not prosecuting it. Either way, we have to recriminalize high end and powerful drugs. If this was a cleaning poison killing over 150,000 people a year, we would instantly, like a fire drill. If it was a 737 going down every single day, we would ground the fleet of 737s, which we, by the way, did after two 737s went down. But we're not acting like our house is on fire. We're not having the appropriate response of how deadly this has become to our country.
So I wanted to ask you about China, but I'll chase since you said that. Let's pursue this a little bit. I didn't know. I have not heard, and I do news radio for a living, so I kind of stay up on most things. But and I do know that here in my state, where I'm coming to you live in Ohio, we just last year had a constitutional amendment in the state of Ohio, a state constitution to allow recreational weed. I think we're like the 29th or whatever, some other number of states that are allowing recreational drugs, at least when it comes to cannabis. You're telling me that we have decriminalized the high end, high potency, high lethality drugs like fentanyl in certain locations? What do we mean by that?
California, Washington State, Oregon, many states and cities, the prosecutors or the attorney generals have stopped prosecuting it. And in California, and here's where I get a little optimism. California legislature has been doing a series of decriminalization efforts over the last 15 years, from low end drugs to high potency drugs, from low volume to high volume. They were legalizing everything, decriminalizing everything. And the California voters, it was sort of lost in the presidential election, but the California voters voted 2-1 to override their legislature to recriminalize high end drugs. This is California voters. This is not middle America or Southeast United States. When the average voters of California start to say, we need to recriminalize drugs and we shouldn't be giving people a pass who are killing tens, hundreds of thousands of people, and we let them go unprosecuted. And so the
Is it
fact that
hitting California harder than other states? You know, because you think about it, it's a border state, obviously. You know, very very liberal populations of San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. Is that why? I mean, are they seeing more fentanyl deaths and overdoses and poisonings there than maybe other places? Do you think?
Oh, by far, they're disproportionately high versus many other states. Part of that's their size, part of that's their border. And it's not just the Mexican border, it's the Pacific Ocean. Don't forget how much is coming through our water ports or the marshes in the southeast. And they were sending out a message that and here's what happens when you decriminalize a high-end drug, you're sort of telling people consciously and subconsciously it can't be that bad for you because we're decriminalizing it. And so that sends a message to users,
You're right.
that sends a message to dealers, it sends a message to parents. Maybe it's not that bad. And I cannot push back hard enough. You can't make fentanyl safe. San Francisco, in another documentary I did on homelessness, they had a safe consumption site for fentanyl right in downtown San Francisco. They spent $28 million setting it up. And I just don't understand how people, policymakers, health officials can try to say, we're going to make fentanyl safe to consume and we're going to make fentanyl a safe supply chain. There's no way you can make fentanyl safe. It's too potent, too dangerous. You can't make it safe to use.
They can make it more lethal though, right? Because you hear that a lot. Um, some, and maybe I'm exaggerating it, but I'd swear I've seen some stories where people have died or nearly been killed simply by touching it. They get some of it on their fingers, and then if they touch their nose or whatever and they ingest it in any way, shape, or form, they're dying. Now that's not all fentanyl pills, but it can be produced or manufactured into to different levels of strength, right?
Absolutely. And if you have an open cut, or if you put it in your nose or your mouth, or what's happening, here's another stat. Children 0 to 4, this is the fastest growing death rate in America of fentanyl poisoning 0 to 4. They're not calling a drug dealer. They're not taking a fentanyl pill. They're getting fentanyl dust, in essence, just the residual, whether it's at a restaurant, park bench. We know people have died both ways, and also sadly where somebody brings fentanyl into your house, touches a table, and all you got to do is put a sandwich right on top of 2 grains of salt of fentanyl equivalent and put it in your mouth and you're dead.
Kind of, yeah, I know a lot of parents and loved ones, and who have lost people to fentanyl. They bristle when they hear everybody saying that there was an overdose, so and so overdosed on fentanyl, because the natural gut reaction for many of us is, well, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. If you don't do drugs, you won't overdose on them. But in many cases, it's not an actual overdose. It's a poisoning, right? There's a difference between overdosing and being poisoned by something that you didn't expect.
We have first responders having to be revived, and they're by no means that they're trying to help the situation. And the other thing to remember, the DA estimates that roughly almost 2/3 of all other drugs have some sort of fentanyl, either lacing or tainted or accidental cross contamination in it. So it's no longer just fentanyl, pure fentanyl. And you got places like Kensington in Philadelphia where they actually marketed it, mixing horse tranquilizer and fentanyl together in order to make the high last longer.
Wow.
And so we have so much that we the way I tell a lot of parents ask me when I go and speak, they go, "What can I do?" And I know it sounds Nancy Reagan-ish, I get it, but we have to realize that 70% of all drugs in America are tainted with fentanyl now on the street. And fentanyl, in and of itself, is the most dangerous drug ever invented, created by mankind. And so we need to start acting like that. That's why first responders, when they're around a fentanyl scene, they're masking up, they're putting gloves on, they're putting masks on, they're putting decam suits on. Why would a producer also dress like that and then try to sell it to you? The cartels, you never see them mixing it like you and I are looking. They put mask on, they put respirator on, they put gloves on, they pull full detox. They know something about the fentanyl that the average American doesn't seem to know, and they know how dangerous it is. And
You,
so
you,
that
you
accidental contact will kill you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said what you said, joking a little bit about Nancy Reagan, the "Just Say No" campaign from the 1980s. But in all seriousness, I've got two kids that graduated high school within the last 5 years, and never once did either one of them tell me that was ever covered in school in any classes, health or otherwise, about what we're talking about right now, about the lethality, and about how you don't have to go out and try to score fentanyl to be killed by fentanyl. You could be buying any number of other drugs from the street, and these manufacturers, they're lacing other drugs with fentanyl, or they are disguising or masquerading fentanyl as a different kind of a drug for whatever reason. I guess just the same reason we saw that clip, because we want to get these people hooked, and we got to get them to try it at least once. And they might not do it because of the education, because maybe the word is getting out. If there's fentanyl, then they're not going to touch it. But if they think it's something else and then it's fentanyl, then they get that high, and then they're going to keep coming back. My point is, and I don't know if you cover this in the doc, is the educational system, are our teachers, are they prioritizing this? Maybe not in a Nancy Reaganish way, but a way of saying anything you touch on the streets like this could be your last touch.
It's amazing we don't talk about this openly, and we talk a little bit about in our movie, and we cover everything you just covered. But think about this: in San Francisco, you can get a $255 ticket for smoking a cigarette outside of a building, and yet you get no punishment for having fentanyl on you right now in San Francisco. And if you continue to be a mass user or a multi offender of cigarette, your fine can go from $250 up to $8,000 in San Francisco. But if you have fentanyl, there's no punishment at all, and there's no talk about fentanyl. You can go to any building in San Francisco and it says, don't smoke in the hallway, don't smoke in your room, don't smoke outside the building. But there's nothing talking about fentanyl in the supply. It feels like we've just really missed the ball here and we have our priorities in the wrong place.
Yeah, I would agree. So I was going to go to China before. Let's go there now. And there, because I'm thinking if the overwhelming majority of the fentanyl that's killing Americans is being produced in China and then being, muled up through Mexico to come in here, or as you said, in some of the other ways from the ports in the Pacific to Canada and so forth. But if it's all originating in China, why isn't China addicted? Why are we the most addicted personality culture in the world? Because China, you would think if this is there and it's so highly addictive that the Chinese would be falling over by the millions.
And you bring up two really good points there. I spent about 3 weeks in China working on the movie, to prep and do research and
Mhm.
and such. And I went all over China. I went to big cities, small. I went to the top 7 of the top 10 big cities. I went to Hong Kong, Macau. I went to small. I went on the public transportation. The entire time in 3 weeks, I only saw 4 people on some influence. Of those four, two were alcohol, one was meth, and one was fentanyl. And you always can tell a fentanyl person because they're bent over. It's called the fentanyl bend. And what fentanyl does
Wow.
is paralyzes your chest cavity. So you stop breathing and your heart stops working. So you see that bend. And I only saw one person the entire time. Last time I was in Philadelphia, San Francisco, both places, there was hundreds of people outside my hotel room on fentanyl. And so the question about why is a really important deal. And that's why we have the American flag in there. And this is beyond China, beyond Canada and Mexico, we also need to be, I think, honest and self-reflective enough and self-aware. Why is it United States consumes 38% of the fentanyl worldwide? Why is it United States pretty much every illicit drug from PCP to angel dust to K2 spice, black tar, heroin, organic opioids, synthetic opioids? Why does the United States consume 30 to 40% of almost every illicit drug worldwide? Some drugs we actually consume more than 50% of the worldwide consumption. Yet we're only 4.25% of the world's population, and that's something we need to have honest conversations about.
Do you cover that? And do you talk to anybody about that and why it is Americans seem to be more addicted and more prone to being, grabbed by these things?
We cover that very extensive in our sort, if you will, our solution section of it. Part of it is United States has a long history of one pill for anything. Got a knee ache, take a pill. Got a sore throat, take a pill. You got depression, take a pill. You're dyslexic, you're dysgraphic, you're hyper this, hyper that, you take a pill. So part of it is we've created a one pill for every solution, is one part. The other part is we do not take care of mental health in America compared to as well as most other countries of the world. So when you have untreated mental illness, especially in the homelessness world, you self medicate on the street because you're not getting the proper mental health care. And then the other is we've sent out a decriminalization concept. you bring up China. In China, it's a death penalty if you distribute fentanyl. Just period, right? And the from getting caught to being sentenced and being executed is often a week. We don't have that sort of sense of if you're a drug dealer here that you've done something really bad. We in fact we're legalizing it, and so China has is very low use of fentanyl. Another one that will surprise people: Mexico has a way below par use worldwide average use of fentanyl. You don't see many people on fentanyl in Mexico, and it's almost like they know it's so dangerous. And I think in that, a lot of people ask, what's China's motivation? Initially, this was all about money. I am absolutely convinced it was just quick, fast, hard currency to their economy when they needed it. But over time, the Chinese party, the Communist Party, has realized, hey, we can bring hard currency to our much needed economy, and it destabilizes our number one adversary. So now they realize it does two things: brings them money, and it destabilizes our country.
I get that from the Chinese perspective. We are their, they're ours and we're theirs. Their number one geopolitical foe. There's truth about that. We're economic rivals in many ways as well. But what about Mexico? Why does Mexico want to be a part of that? We kind of are Mexico's, benefactor, protector, and everything else just because we share the continent with them. I mean, I get why China would want to weaken us and enrich themselves at the same time, but they have to use Mexico in order to get it here. Why does Mexico comply? If the United States becomes weaker and much more prone to, I don't want to go crazy and talk about invasion, but you do understand that there are nations, the Iranians, North Koreans, the Russians, Communist Chinese, and so forth that do want to take the United States apart. Why would Mexico have anything to benefit from that? Why wouldn't they say, "Hey, no, we're not gonna be your land bridge to run your drugs up there"?
And that's a really deep and sad answer when you get into it. Not everybody in Mexico wants fentanyl there. They absolutely don't want it. While we were filming the movie, we were hoping to interview the deputy mayor of Mexico City, sorry, deputy police chief of Mexico City, an incredible gentleman who was really going after the cartels, really trying to shut it down. And we were hoping to interview him for our movie. He got executed, shot on the street, because he
Wow.
was fighting back and fighting against the cartels. And because there's so much money involved, the cartels are just so powerful. Now, we have people we interviewed in Mexico consistently told us, and always remember, it's always important to know what your opponent or your opposition or the negotiation across the table knows. They actually blame it on us. They said if America only consumed 4% of the fentanyl rather than 38% of the fentanyl, we wouldn't have that much cartel power here. They don't. The average citizen of Mexico hates the cartels. The government, the clean government officials, hate the cartels. But because of the amount of drugs we buy in the United States, that's a lot of cash going to cartels.
Yeah,
So
they're
they're
not
fighting.
wrong. They're not wrong. We do. If we provide the demand, they're going to provide the supply, and that's a very, very true point that you make.
And they're a country that has chosen to be very anti-gun. They don't have the Second Amendment and that we have, and they always will be very fast to point out that 70% of the guns involved in crime in Mexico came from the United States illegally, always tied back to the drug chain. And so that we need to remember, if United States, think about if we did these five things. China stopped shipping precursors. Mexico agreed to a joint operation like we did with Colombia on the cartels. We do the same thing with the biker gangs in Canada. We recriminalize high end drugs. And America moves consumption from 38% to 4.25%, equal to our world population. If we do all five of those, we would be done with this problem in a matter of weeks. If you can do all five of those things simultaneously, we would be done with this problem and we'd be on to other issues at that
Well,
point in time.
I hope in the documentary you come up with other solutions because those things aren't going to happen, especially simultaneously, as you say, managing to find a way to broker deals with I mean, how do you broker with a biker gang? How do you broker a deal
Yeah,
with, cartels and so on and so forth? But the key to all of that, though, is to lower the demand. And that would be,
absolutely.
as you said, recriminalize these higher end drugs and so on and so forth. But again, the American population has an appetite for these things, maybe unlike any other. Um, I,
We,
I
we,
wonder, I wonder
we,
if the real
we're
harsh thing,
60, we're 66% of all death of fentanyl worldwide, of reported fentanyl deaths worldwide now. And it's because we overconsume. Now,
yeah,
I want to push back gently on. I'm more optimistic, and I get why people can get really down on this. We went in and busted up the coke trade in Colombia by doing joint operations with the government. And remember how many elected officials were getting killed on the street, how many people of faith were getting killed on the street who were fighting family members in Colombia. I've been to Colombia in the last few years, and Colombia is a beautiful country now. That and most of Colombia is I felt totally safe going through. And in 11, 12, 14 years ago, that was probably the most dangerous place for an American to go worldwide. And now Colombia it fixed it, but we did joint operations with Colombia. We did joint military and paramilitary operations, and we created a lot of agreements, and we were able to get Guzman dismantle that whole network. And I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying they're not parts of the country that still need help, but it's way better off that I, as a tourist, can go through Colombia and go to 4 or 5 cities in Colombia, including Medellin, and be perfectly fine. And so we've done this before. We know these solutions. We just got to have leadership that says, let's go do this, not
yeah.
let's talk about it around the fire, and nobody ever does anything.
It's hard though to get another nation to commit to joint operations like that when, like you just said, the deputy chief of police in Mexico City was just killed by the cartels. How are you going to get and how are you going to get Mexican officials, police, and so on and so forth to agree to these joint operations? I don't know what the answer to that is. But I do know it's interesting. You talk about how dangerous Colombia used to be and how it's much more, of a safe place overall, despite certain spots. Mexico used to be such a high, value resort, vacation spot for American tourists. I wouldn't step foot into Mexico. And I don't care if it is in an all inclusive resort area because we are seeing more and more stories of people being killed, kidnapped, abducted, and so on and so forth from resorts or transportation from, airports to the resort locations and so forth. It has become so lawless there, again, because anybody who tries to crack down on the cartels, well, they become a victim of the cartels. They're virtually running not just the border, but the border towns and the border, and the resorts that are close to the border as well.
And I'm here in San Antonio, so I'm about an hour and a half away from the border, and I do a lot of work in multiple cities across the border. And the people I work with, like the local mayor, city manager, city council, doctors, police, fire, and these are individuals who are Hispanic, Latino, Latina. They don't go across the border. They're fearful
Yeah.
of going across the border right there. And I think that also explains why President Trump elect did he won most of the county borders because they used to go back and forth, see family members, go to a restaurant, come back and forth. You don't see that anymore. People feel so unsafe on the Texas border now, of that I've never seen that because I remember as a kid I'd go down to Laredo and places, and I would go across the bridge and go see friends, go to restaurants, and then come back. You couldn't imagine doing that now. It's so dangerous.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing when people who are Mexican and living in the States don't wanna go over to Mexico. That's pretty astounding. Do you talk about numbers in terms of, dollars? The impact of the fentanyl crisis in this country? Because we're talking about a wide variety of things, costs with respect to, medical costs, loss of productivity from people who become addicted and so on and so forth. There are a lot of different angles to this. Do you hit that?
Yes, and there's nothing else now that is as much of an existential threat to our country as the fentanyl crisis. Just think about the total death toll. This is more than World War II. If you just full stop and just stop right there, you would go, "Oh, yeah, that's bad." But it's World War II, Afghanistan, Iraq, Gulf War One, Gulf War Two, Kosovo. Uh, Add all that up for 100 years, still more people have died. So why? I often get criticized. I talk about. I think this is a bigger threat than Mussolini, Tojo, and Hitler all combined in terms of death rate. Now, there are a lot of other measurements you could look at, and those all three were really bad people. But so are the Canadian biker gangs. So are the cartels. So are the
Yeah.
bad actors in China, and they're killing more people than died in the wars. And so, why aren't we acting like that? We certainly are not acting like that death toll would in my view, would call for in terms of a response. And the fact that innocent 0 to 4 children, this is the fastest growing death rate in that group. This is not about recreational drug users, it's way more than that.
I am loath to give credit to a communist nation in any way, shape, or form. But I'm interested when I asked you about why, China doesn't have the kind of addiction rate that we have and the death rate and so on and so forth. And you did talk about some pretty harsh stuff. They will sometimes arrest, charge, convict, and execute somebody within a week for selling this stuff. Do we need to start looking at harsher punishments in that regard? Because they call it, the war on drugs. The war on drugs has failed. We lost the war on drugs. We ended up incarcerating more people. That didn't change anything, and blah blah blah. And it's a waste of money. It's throwing good money after bad. But we don't prosecute it like that. Well, if somebody is caught with a whole bunch of drugs, well, addiction is the disease. They're victimized. They're not necessarily criminals. And if you're selling it, well, these are underprivileged people who are, see no way out. And so they have to make some money. They can't get money in the economy the way it is. So they're doing some things like this. There's always an excuse for this kind of thing. Do we need to crack down and become, we might not be executing people within a week the way we just described in a communist China, but do we need to do something like that?
We absolutely have to get harder on the high end drugs and the high volume of drugs. And if you're a wholesaler, if you're a mass distributor, we need to have as harsh a punishment of whatever you're going to view of murder. And I know some states in America are, life without parole, others are execution, but we're not treating a drug dealer like they're a killer. But a drug dealer of fentanyl is a
Is a
killer,
killer. Agreed.
and we need to rechange our paradigm. And if you're a mass wholesaler, mass distributor of drugs, and if it's fentanyl, you are killing people, and we need to treat that like that. And so, likewise, I also think it's very important for the addict user that we need to make it very easy to get treatment. And I mean the consumer. I'm not talking the distributor, the wholesaler. They're not making any money of it. But in America, and I got a mantra that drives all my philosophy around this. Currently in America, we make it so easy to get high and so hard to get treatment. We need to flip it on the head and make it easy to get treatment and hard to get high. And
Yeah.
and I really think it is that simple. And I know it sounds like a soundbite, but to me it is a mantra, and we need to start moving toward that.
Yeah, treatment for the addict is one thing. Punishment for the offender is another, though. For the distributor. And here's one of the reasons why. And this is going to be a little bit touchy, but Do we have demographic breakdowns? Did you, in your research for the film, do any demographic breakdowns of the distributors, not the users? Who's selling it? The people that we should see as people who are selling death. Do we have any demographics? And the reason I'm asking is, well, let me find out what they are first, and then I'll tell you why I asked.
What you'll find is the distributor wholesalers, they match the local demographic of whatever the local demographic is. And so you
That
can
makes
even
sense.
see it in Native American communities selling to Native American communities. In a black community, you'll see it a black community. In a white community, you'll see a white or there. There are two
Okay,
communities.
but take that and then tell me which communities are the most afflicted then.
Yeah, and I was going to say the two communities who's less afflicted by fentanyl is the Hispanic community and the Asian community. They're slightly lower, and the white and black community are slightly higher. Even though it really hits all communities pretty hard,
Mhm.
but there is a slight um, the communities that have deeper family traditions have a slightly lower use, but it's still pretty high.
And between black and white, they're pretty much the same or
Yeah, black and
within
white's
shouting
pretty
distance of one
similar. Yeah.
another? Okay, I'm glad to hear that. The reason I ask is because, with the First Step Act that happened in the first Trump presidency, and and all of the different cries for equity in the criminal justice system, and the prisons are too overwhelmingly minority and not enough white. And so, if there is a major crackdown on the sellers, the distributors, the mules, the coyotes, whatever you want to call them, who are getting these drugs up here and then passing them out. Um, if it's overwhelmingly or even just a little bit more one color or race than another, we're going to have a problem cracking down on that. So that's not based on what your research shows, community wise, race wise. There's not really one over another.
And now think about the actual border going across the border. Right now, you got Canadian biker gangs that are mostly of French or Anglo descent.
Right.
And then in Mexico, you have mostly Hispanic. And I mean, just taking it across the border. And you
Mhm.
mentioned something earlier I'd like to curl back on real quick.
Sure.
I think in any sovereign country of the world, one of it's not even your first thing you should do, it's almost prerequisite. It's the basic concept of being a sovereign country. We need to know who's coming across our borders and what are they bringing with them. That's just a basic tenet of a sovereign country. And in many ways, the last 4 years, it became super political. It became left, right, and such. I think this is a red, white, blue issue. We need to protect who's coming across the border, and we need to really want to know what they're bringing across. And if you're bringing fentanyl across, we got to have the harshest of harsh punishments if you're bringing fentanyl in to the United States. Just like I think we need a harsh punishment for local gangs that are now distributing it in your neighborhood down there. And what worries me is fentanyl initially started out being produced in China and the pills were brought in through Canada and Mexico. Now China has become they bring in agents, sort of precursor agents or pre-precursor agents now, and now you see the fact that it's jumped from the cartels to biker gangs in Canada. Pretty soon this is going to be in gangs down the street. If we don't get our act together, you can make a gang down the street, Bloods and the Crips and the Trace AAAs and the MS-13 and all those groups.
Tren de Aragua now.
Yeah, and they're going to be bringing it, the Aryan Nation, etc. They're going to start making it. They're going to say, "Hey, this is a revenue source for our gang, and we can start doing it." And so we need no. We have never seen a death rate of anything. The fact that 18 to 45, this is the number one cause of death is fentanyl. Full stop. Period. Not no caveats. Just full stop. Period. 18 to 45, fentanyl is number one killer in America. Fastest killer in the 0 to 4 age group, which is clearly not an addiction issue or a dealing issue. That's the poisoning issue.
Right.
And we haven't even talked about the misuse of fentanyl patches. And where a person gets a prescription for fentanyl because of pain
For
post
pain
surgery
management, right?
or as late stage cancer. And now you're seeing a lot of people with cancer who get patches for pain relief, and they're properly monitored. And you put one patch on, and it's not unlike all other patch medicine that you put on them, properly prescribed and dosed, etc. So now you're seeing young children getting into those prescriptions of patches, and they'll put 3 or 4 patches on and die. And that's a misuse of a prescription. That's
Right.
not even any of the other stuff we've
The
talked
bad
about.
actors, yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up children because I was gonna go there. You mentioned the 0 to 4 and the kids who are just being poisoned, with the dust or whatever the case might be, and then you talk about 18 to 45. It's the number one killer in the country. Let's go to that gap in between there. The 4-year-olds to the 18-year-olds. What really, really, really angers me, pisses me off, if I may, honestly, doctor, is they're making these fentanyl tablets and you remember what are they called? They were on the strips of paper when we were kids. You'd pick their colored candies that you would pick off the papers. I can't remember what they were called, but I've seen this in news stories. And they're making fentanyl look like Skittles, and they're literally trying to just trick kids into thinking this candy is candy, and instead it's fentanyl, and it's killing them. It's not hooking them; it's killing them. And if they do get hooked, they're not going to last very long. But they're literally so they're targeting little kids, and it's almost like, you know, these kids don't have money. These kids aren't going to be able to buy more later. So I feel like they're not trying to create customers there, doctor. They're just trying to kill people. They're trying to kill kids.
Well, in the initial business model, and right
Candy
after,
dots, I think. I'm sorry, candy dots. It just came to me what those
yeah,
things were called. Those candy dots on paper, but they're making them out of fentanyl.
and we show in our documentary pictures of some of these, and they look just like candy. They're multicolored fentanyl tablets, and they look like candy, like whether it's M&Ms or skillets or dots or whatever,
Yeah.
and they're totally marketing to them. And remember, a lot of people ask, well, why would a dealer, knowing it's so powerful, the clip you put at the front end, that's not good business. The business model has changed with fentanyl. In the beginning, it was a high margin, a very expensive drug, $30, $40 per tablet. And so not everybody could afford it, high volume, and you can make a lot of money. At some point, when competition took root, they've now going for a high volume. And so it's a whole different business model now when you go high volume. And when you do high volume, that means more people are going to die, but they're going to have more overall sales and make their money back with a high volume. And it is we need to act like our country is on fire, and we are not acting like that.
Yeah. What's the cost now? Used to be $30, $40 a tablet. What does it go for now with all
Oh,
the
you
customers?
you can get a tablet in many parts of America for under $1 now,
Oh
even
my God.
sits on $1 now.
What about the rest of the world? What about, I mean, China has found their willing buyers here. I get it. But, the West, generally speaking, they may not be identical to the United States, but it's similar in our appetites, maybe, and our freedoms, and so on and so forth. I mean, what is China not flooding France, Spain, England, Germany, any of the, Western European nations with this?
If you look at addictions, Narcan reversals, deaths, cross contamination, if you look at it, United States is 2/3 of the death toll worldwide due to fentanyl. The next is Western Europe, all through Western Europe, Spain, Portugal, France, England, Germany. You get there. And the other two places that have really started to spike is New Zealand and Australia, and
Mm.
most of that fentanyl supply is coming in through Canada. So you got easier trade when you're inside the British Empire. You don't get as checked as much and such. So you have product going from Canada to New Zealand and to Australia now, and Canada is the number one supplier of those two countries now of fentanyl.
What about the other Asian countries? I mean, does Japan, Philippines, Korea,
Very
any
little fentanyl use in
South
Asia.
Korea?
Very little
Really?
fentanyl use, and I always go, what do they know? And they know to their deep DNA in the root how dangerous it is, and they don't do it.
You
And
know,
the fact that the makers, if you just looked at what it took to make, and you put on it's basically a hazmat suit, a ventilator, goggles, gloves. And if you're making something like that, why in the world would you put it in your body if that's what the maker's making? They know that if they breathe that in, they're dead.
yeah, which comes back to the education then, like I said earlier on. I mean, show that. Make every kid in every school across America watch a video of the making of fentanyl and the individuals, head to toe in the hazmat suit. Now, if they have to do that to protect themselves, why would you put it in your mouth? Is it worth the high or
Exactly.
whatever you're going to get? I mean, that's a real good education point. I think right there. And what's interesting? I think the only part of the world we haven't discussed about this yet is Eastern Europe. The nations that are a little bit more heavy handed, a little bit more lockdowny, not just Russia, but they don't seem to be as impacted by this. Is there no market there for it at all, or is it that the government really comes down hard?
The government comes down really down hard, and I will give you one exception. India, if we were going to put a fifth flag up, and we spent a lot of time talking about it, we would have put an Indian flag up,
Mhm.
because India is also uh, making a lot and distributing it. Not nearly what China, Mexico, or Canada are doing, but they would be probably in the fourth position. And so, if we were to add a fifth flag, it would have been India. And we spent a lot of time internally talking about, do we dilute the main message by getting off to Pakistan and India, which has an emerging problem? It'd be the way I'd put it. They're not nearly like where we're at now, but they are an emerging problem with fentanyl. In India, in particular, is also a sizable distributor of organic opioids and synthetic opioids.
And India, hasn't India surpassed China? Aren't they the largest population in the world? I think.
Yeah, they're pretty close. I
Yeah.
always find it's hard because they actually do different measurement techniques, but it looks like India probably has surpassed China. Part of that's because India is continuing to have a higher birth rate. The other
Right.
part is China's one baby doctrine. They've only recently changed that because they're
Right.
starting to shrink so much. I was on a finance call with people talking about international things. Apparently, in China, there are 50 million houses for rent or purchase that are empty because of the population demographic change. Think about that, 50 million. 50 million in the United States would be a like Great Depression, 1930s type of deal. But in China, 50 million goes into 1.2, 1.3 billion number. But that's a major. Their biggest problem with economic challenge in China now is their real estate market. They overbuilt, and the population's been coming down.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing situation they have going on in China. So the film is called Fentanyl Death Incorporated. And again, salemnow.com is where you can look to watch the film.
Right now, you can go to salemnow.com. So that's like a computer based streaming or a smartphone streaming. And then we will go to other major traditional platforms later in the spring.
Yeah, and we played a little clip, one of the trailers. There's 4 trailers available, 4 or 5 right now on the website, which is fentanyldeathincorporated.com as well. You should definitely watch those and get a little bit of an appetite and share those around too. I mean it, Doctor. We talked before about education, and if the schools aren't going to do it, programs like mine, radio, television, podcasting, whatever it is, we need to get the word out there, and we need to show as many of these things as possible, even if it's just in trailer form, to let people know, and especially to let kids know. This is not how it's supposed to be. You and I grew up. I don't know exactly what your age is, but when we were growing up, we had threats. There might have been pot dealers hanging around our schools from time to time, and you might have occasionally a few harder things. Somebody might have had an acid tablet here or there, or somebody might have had mushrooms, magic mushrooms. But you know what? That one stuff is going to kill you. That stuff was not going to kill you. And right now, these kids, our kids, need to be told stay away from all of those drugs because you don't know when one of these, cartels or manufacturers or whatever are going to be producing something and lacing it with fentanyl, which is going to kill you the first time it touches your tongue. We really need every kid to know that. So I want everybody as far and wide as possible to share the video and share any other information. Anything
That
in
is
closing?
so well said. I mean, you just hit it perfectly. So well said. And thank you for getting that message out.
Well, thank you for making the film and doing all of the research and the legwork, Dr. Robert Marbut. We appreciate that. Best of luck with the film. We'll do our part to try to let people know as well. We're going to play back some of this interview on my radio program too, so we can hit a wider audience, and hopefully more and more people will start to get the idea. FentanylDeathIncorporated.com for all of the information you need there. Doctor, thank you for the time. Keep up the great work, sir.
Thank you for caring about the fentanyl crisis. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate that. All right. And if you are interested in what we just presented to you for this last hour and you think other people will as well, please share this link. Share this video, whether you're watching on, and don't forget to like and subscribe and share it as well if you're watching on Rumble, on YouTube, or listening to it on Spotify. We really appreciate getting as many people out there as possible to have this information. Thanks for watching Strictly Speaking. We'll see you next time.